Really great to be here today, presenting some of the work we're doing here at UCSD and kind of giving you an idea of where we're going in the robotics space as we incorporate AI, or at least the current idea of what AI means into into the physical world. So I run the Advanced Robotics and Controls Lab. Yeah, I've been doing robotics for about 20 years, and I've seen the shift that has come from classical approaches from AI perception, modeling, control, planning, integrating all aspects of mechanical design, electrical design, um, uh, the introduction of machine learning, and then now into kind of this new age of AI. And we also build robots in my research lab. And so we try to think about everything holistically and see how all the pieces fit together and really try to drive and solve solutions that are impactful in the real world. They often come at us in many different places. And really, it's really to solve a problem of labor, like physical AI and robotics is really addressing a need for skilled labor across many industries, whether it's from things in the trades or from healthcare and agriculture. There's a lot of jobs that are needing physical labor to come in and push that field forward and meet the demands. And so robotics is here to save the day, right? Like the idea that a robot never gets tired, it can operate 24/7. There's actually like images of robots working in complete darkness. They have great precision when it's very highly structured environments. They're scalable. Software updates can occur fleet-wide. Unlike people who you have to train one by one, you can kind of train a system and just upload it and deploy every a new skill automatically. And then there's this idea of maybe with enough memory bandwidth, you can aggregate knowledge indefinitely. And there's also uniformity in behavior. Obviously, amongst different human operators and different laborers, they have different skill sets and quality of their skill sets. We can look at uniformity with physical AI and robots. But if you look at what's actually being deployed today, robots are autonomous, yes, but they're not very skilled in the sense that they're very rigid, they're pre-programmed behaviors, they operate only in very structured environments like manufacturing and logistic, like warehouses. They require extensive setup and human oversight, only in these cases do they really excel in terms of like speed, precision, and repeatability. But as we look forward into the new generation of physical AI, we're looking at new robots that can perceive, reason, and act in dynamical, physical, uncertain environments, things that they've never seen before, adapt to uncertainty and variation, and learn behaviors and most importantly, situational context through physical interactions with the world. And so physical AI is to basically produce physical work in the real world, address the key labor shortages, improve our human occupational mobility, and elevate the workforce. And not only is everybody converging into these ideas of where what the approach might be to get to the stage of a generality for physical AI, we're also seeing platforms converging. And so the idea of humanoid robots has become kind of in the zeitgeist, right, of where AI is heading towards. And these humanoid platforms have been shown to behave in and to be capable of performing all kinds of different physical tasks. And these companies are just growing and expanding at an enormous rate. I believe like we're approaching several hundreds of billions of dollars at least in humanoid capital has been deployed into developing the physical and the software backend for these humanoid robots, all towards this idea that with a common physical embodiment, right, there's a shared knowledge, sharing of knowledge, skills, and understanding, right? If you have a robot that it all kind of takes on the human form, then sharing skill sets may actually be much more transferable. Of course, this is all like a hypothesis.
Grow hair in the next one?
Yeah. I think we'll merge the metal with the biology in the next one. So this is this kind of like dream of where it's all going, right? So I'll take an example from our research lab. We're really interested in the healthcare environment. Interestingly enough, healthcare is one of those areas that are strangely not as focused on right now in the humanoid robotics space. But if you just look at, where do you have a massive labor shortage and no clear sight of, fulfilling that, and a lot of capital being pumped into and being able to be reimbursed for, the labor, it's, hospitals, right? Nurses, surgeons, technicians, a lot of opportunities for humanoid robots to come in. So let me show you the first work in humanoid robots that has ever been deployed in a hospital here, and it started here at USCSD. That was great, but one thing you may have noticed is that all this physical AI was actually done through teleoperation. And so there was a human operator involved. They were teleoperating the robot. They were either looking, actually they were side by side actually in a lot of the experiments, but another instance was they were looking through the cameras of the robot head and basically carrying out all those motions. And so that's a great start, but where do we go from here? Because that's not really expanding the workforce, nor is it really contributing very much to meeting the shortage of labor. And so we have to look at getting to autonomy, right? And so one of the immediate realizations was that when we try to go towards autonomy, we actually have to deal with some really hard problems that crop up with actually the physical manifestation of these systems. And that's, let's start with one of the biggest challenges, which is complex object interaction. And so when we look at our human hands are actually pretty amazing in that there's a ton of degrees of freedom in our hands, and there's a massive amounts of sensing. Tons of signals coming into our hands, and we're interpreting them, and we're using that signals to actually do like grasp and force control of different objects and of different tools. And so the traditional way to do this within the kind of robotics framework was to use all the classical tools that we had before, which is like AI perception. We model the hand, we model the objects, we do planning, we do control, and we just solve this really complex optimization problem, a model-based complex optimization problem. An example of us actually doing it in our lab was this application of wound care, where we were trying to have a robot peel off and put back on wound dressings using model-based techniques. But the modern approach is using things like vision language models. And so vision language models are just vision language action models are just like vision language models, which is input of tasks defined by language, images from a camera, that convert it through a transformer model into actions a robot should take. And these are trained these days usually by very large companies with massive amounts of compute and in the multi-billion-dollar parameter transformer kind of model size space, usually taking hundreds of thousands of dollars to train once, and they train it off data that's collected from real demonstrations. So they'll go ahead and collect from a real robot, let's say a humanoid robot, somebody teleoperating the robot to perform these tasks. And obviously, there's a huge labor cost of that too, of getting all this data. And so is there really like a better way to do this? It's to use simulation, right? And to use simulation and not use the human laborer to learn how to interact with the world. If you can simulate the world, then you can actually get the data you need to train these models. And so one of the things that we look at is how do you do simulation of complex object interaction with robots. And so this is done using reinforcement learning in simulations that you can very massively parallelize. This is done using the NVIDIA CUDA architecture. This is actually Groot, which is one of the world models from NVIDIA. And what we learn is that data, obviously does help robots learn, but what we have to be very careful about is the data curation, right? There's good data and bad data. And so we really want to restrict the simulation environments so that they're very narrow in task. The embodiments or the types of robots that we're using are very specific. And we have to very carefully tune these environments, the reward functions, shaping. And what we realize is at the end of the day, we've basically shifted the problem that everybody had been doing with classical parameter tuning in control theory to machine learning, data science parameter tuning. We haven't really solved much of a problem here. It's just a shifting of the different domains. So instead of kind of going down just this path, maybe there's a way to combine live, kind of warm start this training process. And so that might be where you use a human demonstrator to kind of give an idea of what's possible with the robot and how the robot should actually carry out a task. And so one of the things we immediately realized is that when you ask a person to actually carry out a task on with robot hands are the same as humans, but they're not the same. So there's actually very limited compliance in the hands. There's actually very big size mismatches. Photos of robot hands might look like they're about the same size, but they're about 50% to 100% larger than our human hands. And one of the interesting things that I think is maybe as I try to tie to the community today is that there's, number one, very limited sensor coverage. But there's a lot of density in those sensing modalities, and there's a lot of data to process and very limited time. So one of the things to keep in mind is that when you actually interact with objects in an environment and you're kind of modulating force, how do you grasp an object and keep it in your hand? What we found in control theory is that you have to actually be modulating forces at about 500 to 1,000 hertz for the object to be stable. Otherwise, it will actually kind of, you'll actually have a jitter, physical jitter, crop up. And so now you have these sensors that are giving you high density information. And you can think about these image patches on the right-hand side, the red patches that I'm showing. Those are each sensors that have sensors of a couple 100 by 100 pixel densities. It's all coming in, and you have to process it all within a millisecond or 2 milliseconds, and convert that into a signal that you can interpret, and then ask the motor on your fingers to regulate, right? So that's a lot to be asking of a processor, and especially a lot if you're going to tie it to a large, transformer model. Okay, so I think one of the things that we realized, first of all, is that we have to, number one, increase the density of the sensing. We did some mechanical hacks here to use foam pads to kind of spread out the sensing. One of the things we realized is that the sensors didn't cover all the areas of the hand, so there were parts that the objects were touching that we had no force sensing on. But once we did that, we were we were capturing the data. We were trying to convert that into a very low embedding neural network and regulate the forces as it interacts with objects. And so here are just some examples of during that training process and capturing that type of data and then rolling it out in real life. Okay. And then we actually did that again for the wound care project, but the wound care project now uses a humanoid robot rather than the industrial robot that I showed before. Yeah, so it peels away the tape, and then it tries to pull back the tape, and then puts it down. What I want to get to is that something still is missing here, right? Nature does not encode everything in one large vision language model. We have gone down this path in physical AI as a community that it's easier to just make one huge black box and learn end to end. The reality is that in nature, we don't do that, right? If we think about our own physical system, 95% of what we do is instinctual, intuitive, and the rest is like higher level rational thinking. And a lot of that is actually physical in nature. A lot of our instinct and instinctual communication happens from our neuronal activities to like our spinal cord to our brainstem and to the brain. All of that is actually physically abstracted at different levels. And right now, our models are not kind of going through that direction. And so we have to start thinking about a different way to approach this problem, right? We have to start thinking about abstracting different levels out, which actually, again, mirrors what I think as technologists from the wireless and processing side of things, what we should be thinking about from a hardware perspective. How do we break these large models down that really is not a very good idea moving forward to some more mechanical and hardware abstractions that you can break down and kind of have different levels of hardware communication with each other to handle different data processing, high frequency tasks to higher level contextual, slower frequency tasks. So one of the projects that we looked at is this locomotion plus manipulation problem. And so as we as humans move around in environments, we're often interacting with objects and different things in our environment. One of the things that one of the things we do instinctively is that we don't think about how we walk anymore, right? We learned that as a kid, and we kind of store that information kind of very back in the deep parts of our both our brain and also from our neural kind of interfaces, biological neural interfaces. So we understand, if we're about to trip, right, we have this response that we can react quickly and prevent tripping. On the other hand, we're interacting with objects, and those kind of interactions might be a little bit higher level in context, right? We have to think a little bit more about that. And so how do we teach robots this kind of abstraction? And how can we do that without going down this end-to-end VLA approach? Yeah. So, if we think about how the human does this, we have different sensors and behaviors that are encoded physically. We have our vestibular system, which is, from the auditory aspect. We have balance, inside the inner ear. There's a bit of fluid inside a pouch, and that fluid is actually telling us through little hairs that are inside that pouch, tell us like how we're kind of getting off balance. We have our visual sight. Visual sight is actually a slower process, right? It has to go, and so that visual sight gives us a bit more context. But we also have proprioception, which is from our muscles and joints and skins. That's like very reactionary, right? The idea of, you touch something hot and it can be very quick to kind of respond. And so if we go towards this approach, we can start looking at first basic abstractions, right? Like lower body learning a policy for walking and an upper body policy for performing the task. And so we can actually break it down from a model-based context, machine learning model-based context. They're learning two different models of behaviors. And what we want to do then is to ensure that one model, like holding an object and interacting with the world, does not supersede and over correct for the the more basic behavior of standing up straight, not tripping over, something that would be very catastrophic for a humanoid robot, we can learn a residual model, right? A third model that says, okay, how do we marry these two together but keep the priority of keeping upright, the highest priority, right? And so we can do this. We've been looking at this area, this kind of abstraction for a little while now, and we can also not only train these models in simulation as we've shown here, but we can also demonstrate them in our lab with our robots. So here are some of my grad students kind of playing around with a robot waiter that's going to move around and try to provide a drink, and it will allow the drink to actually fall before it decides to crumble and trip over. Okay, so this is a new work that we're going towards. This idea of vision language models and the current approach of physical AI of embedding everything into a very expensive to train, very large parameter black box model that takes half a second to a second to run an inference on. It just doesn't compute physically well for these robot systems. And so I'll say, kind of looking ahead, can we move towards this more natural hierarchical distributed intelligence? Here's the way I see it. So we have our human bodies as a very good example of what natural intelligence should look like. Can we mimic that into our robot counterparts? We have our central nervous system. We have the brain and the spinal cord giving us context awareness and really deep processing of contextual information from our eyes, ears, and other senses. We have our spinal cord, which is coordinating all of our separate component anatomy down to our fingertip neurons, but also to the context that we get from our brain. And then we have a peripheral nervous system. We have both the sensory feedback coming in, and we have the motor actuation that's going out. The peripheral nervous system is one that has to embed all of the sensors, the enormous amount of sensing that we have from our sense of touch, and convert that all into a relatively simple signal that our lower dimensional muscles, so like of the hundreds of types of muscles that we have, that can convert that very high signal into some actions for the motors to carry out, and it has to happen in 1,000 hertz kind of frequency. And finally, how much of this can be broken up into voluntary motion and involuntary motion? And if you look at this kind of layout, it really coincides with how both data processing, how both communication between different layers of compute, and both the hardware of how you separate compute between cloud computing, CPU, GPU, or NPU processors, to FPGAs and ASICs. Like, how do you kind of separate that out? This is what people aren't thinking about today, but I believe they are going to have to think about very soon, and they will realize that this is what is necessary to really get these systems out there and contributing to our society. Again, none of this work is, of course, possible without the fabulous grad students I have. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
How far along do how many more years do you think we have before we get to a robot that can do, let's say, a household activity, like washing dishes, or?
Yeah, I think so. The question being, how far are we from a robot that can do things like washing dishes or some sort of household activity? One thing I would say that the task really matters, right? So one of the very clear winners kind of upfront for applications is laundry folding, because laundry folding is a very much a task that doesn't require a huge amount of precision, right? It's okay that your clothes are not folded in perfect squares, right? And so it's also okay that you grip a little harder on your clothes than you need to, right? or you drop a shirt. Now, if we look at VLMs, for example, like what is the accuracy models of VLMs today? They're reaching 95%. Let's say even like a great VLM is like 99%, and then each decimal point you get is like way harder to get. All right, so let's take that into like the dishwashing example. Let's say every time you do a dishwashing task, 99% of the time you pick up the plate, great. The last 1% of the time you drop the plate, right? By the end of the week, you have no more plates. So how far are we there, right? Like, I think we're very far away there. So it really is task dependent. But laundry folding, I think, is probably one of the first things to come in. Actually, there's companies that are selling to laundromats these like folding robots now. They are two-handed. Are they humanoid? There's no head to it really. Like it's a camera kind of mounted on a gantry and two hands. I mean, the actual form factor is not very important, but it's really a task. Yeah.
I have a question on, thanks by the way for a fascinating presentation, question on soft robotics, right? When I left King's 4 years ago, some of my colleagues maintain it's going to be the next big thing. Do you see it the same way? So soft robots, which are kind of mimicked on an octopus as an example, do you see this as an area which is growing? And does, some of your methodology translate straight to this, or would we need to restart actually the entire motion control field?
Yeah, that's a great question. So soft robotics is... Yeah, I agree it's a very exciting field. Soft robotics actually benefits enormously from the fact that you use as much data as possible to learn the nuances of how do you interact with the environment with a soft interface, because it's so hard to like simulate something soft. NVIDIA actually has a hard time right now in their world model simulating soft objects. But now you have this problem of, okay, well, if you can't simulate it, you need to do it physically. This becomes more like a mechanical issue. So soft materials tend to degrade and tend to change over time pretty rapidly. And so, your data starts becoming, your data when you start collecting the data, like the robot has a characteristic that's probably a little bit more soft, less brittle. And then as it goes on, it becomes a little bit more brittle. It starts wearing apart, right? And so the data collection pipeline becomes a problem because it's changing over time and very rapidly. And so I think the approach of data-driven physical AI is right for soft robotics to propel forward. But I think there is kind of a mismatch between material science right now and where it's not robust enough mechanically.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah.
So I'll be loud. So I have seen these robots, figure AI and all of this, and you said something important. You said their hands are much larger, and when you stand next to them, they are also 6'1", 6 feet, and they are bigger and bulkier and big-chested. Why don't we make robots that look like you and me, like 5'7", 5'8", so they fit in houses and have smaller hands and smaller bodies and things like that? Why are we making robots that are huge, except for defense, of course. We want them bigger and bigger, of course. But if we want to use them in, in environments where the humans are there, why don't we do this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So robots getting bigger and bigger versus making sure that they're smaller, safer. I think there are robots that are smaller, than what you see from, for example, Tesla or Figure. The reality is that the force scaling doesn't work out very well. So the smaller the robot you get, like the robots we were using, they're actually pretty small. They're about 5 feet tall. They can generate about 1.5 pounds of force. You can't do very much with 1.5 pounds of force. We basically push the envelope there. But these companies that are making humanoids, they really, they're trying to find that middle ground of what is possible and what is most useful. And so they've settled on this kind of size of, like you said, 6 foot tall robot. Yeah, but that would be like one big limitation.
And big hands and big thing. I mean, they are imposing figures.
Oh yeah, the big hands problem is because we have like probably about 30 plus degrees of freedom in our hands. And you can think about how to fit 30 motors in your hand, like 30 motors for a robot, like humanoid hand. It's just physically not possible to put that all in there. So you have to make sacrifices. Motor technology actually has come a long way to increase the power density of motors, but we're not there yet to miniaturize all of that.